Let's go ahead and bring in our friend Tom Rogan to the show. He's standing by. Let's put him up here on the screen. Old friend Tom, good to see you. Thanks for joining the show, man.
Good to be with you guys. Thanks.
Yeah, Tom, you've been doing a lot of reporting on this. We read your tweet earlier about the recalibration of NORAD and systems. What is your read on this situation right now? What are your sources telling you?
Well, I think the fundamental point that you guys just hit on there is, number one, the government really has caught itself in a web here by basically playing down, along with a lot of people in the media, quite frankly, the idea that some UFOs are, truly unknown. And to your point, Saagar, that we still don't have debris recovery officially for these most recent incidents, I think beggars belief based on how the military operates. Fundamentally that I don't think is true. I think they just don't know, at least in a couple of these cases, what they shot down. And now they've opened, the basket of worms by recalibrating the radar systems and their intercepts. So as before, they could say that, some of the more unusual UFOs, let's say, to be generous, are, sensor aberrations, things that, it's the wind, the radar is misaligned, etc. It's too small to be a concern. We can just ignore it. Now, because of their changes, because it's political, because of the balloon, they're running up and intercepting all this stuff that's probably been there for a very long time, and they don't know quite how to deal with it. And I think the secondary point that's really interesting is the media spin now is, well, there's no evidence it's extraterrestrial. Well, obviously. I mean, what are they expecting there? That there's going to be some communication between these drones and something, in outer space in a foreign language. What they're not saying, though, is there's evidence here of unconventional technology and capability. The closest we've got to that, which is the most compelling statement, I think, is the NORAD commanders saying we don't know how it's staying aloft and propulsion, which really roots back to the more extraordinary UFOs anyway. Unconventional technology, quite frankly, means it ain't us, and it probably ain't China and Russia in terms of these capabilities. What we really need to see now, I think, is what is some of the radar showing with what these objects have been doing before the intercept? Have they been moving in ways that really then gets to, very fast speeds, for example, and potentially, anti-gravity style behavior?
Excellent point.
Yeah, those are all great points. We've obviously been covering here that preliminary assessment about the unidentified aerial phenomena, all the reportings and sightings, the videos, the pilot accounts of, seeing things that they can't really explain, that moves in ways that seem to defy physics and technology as we understand it. How do these limited descriptions we have of these objects dovetail with some of those earlier sightings and accounts?
Well, I think the fundamental point goes back to clearly the military knows enough, or at least elements of the military know enough to know that these are, unconventional. And when we look at, the reporting in recent years that unfortunately has been kind of limited, journalists wanting to do this, there are the things we would look for in terms of saying that something truly extraordinary is going on with some UFOs, with a very small percentage of UFOs, is, hypersonic instantaneous acceleration, transmedium travel, can go underwater without cavitation, which is air bubbles, so the submarines will pick them up on sonar. The ability to kind of stop on a dime, the ability to incur what we would perceive to be, G-forces ranging into the hundreds. What is really notable, though, and I think goes back to that stigma point, which is so central to this topic, and frankly, I think underlines where there's been such journalistic malpractice and not being willing to turn it from certain folks, such as yourself, is the point that the military has been able to somehow, I don't want to say buy off, but blur off members of the media, scientific community by saying, oh, well, that's probably a radar or sonar or satellite sensor malfunction, even when it correlates with, trained aerial observers. So the point I always make that was made to me, you don't put someone in charge of sonar on an attack or ballistic missile submarine or a satellite system at the highest end, $140 million fighter jet loaded with weapons if you think they might not be playing with a full deck, right? What if they decide to fly? What if they decide to fly off to New York and do a 9/11 style attack? What if they decide to not alert that there's something coming on the sonar in the submarine? Like, this is ludicrous. The opposite is true. You put the most, cogent people in charge.
As such, that is an excellent point. It's like for people to say, oh, these guys were mistaken. You're saying that some of the most seasoned warfighters through the global war on terror, who have had flown thousands of hours of air missions, who have presumably encountered millions of different objects or whatever, cannot distinguish from their equipment what is an anomaly and what is actually real. It's completely ridiculous. Right. Tom, one thing I think for people at home, I've received a lot of pushback on this. I'm sure you have as well. Is this is a psyop. What are you guys falling for? Clearly, this is all in preparation for this. There's a belief that the U.S. government is competent enough or smart enough in able to craft this big narrative here in the lead up to something. However, something you and I have discussed privately and often is the truth is that they're just terrified to say, we have no idea what's going on up there. Given your own experience, you're talking with Pentagon intelligence sources and all of that, which one do you think is the actual scenario that's playing out here?
I think there's probably a very small element that has sustained really since the Manhattan Project and the Second World War, which has known that there's some other intelligence operating some of these things. But I think broadly, the same principles that the military applied to this issue in the 1940s and 50s sustains today, which is, to your point, they truly don't know. They know it's not us, Russia, or China, again, in this very small percentile. But when they have the sensor data matched up with pilots, multiple different platforms, multiple pilots, multiple air crews and platforms, sonar operators, for example, something really is compelling going on there. And they don't know what to do, right? It's an unconventional technology. It behaves in intelligent ways in terms of its counter maneuver sometimes when it's intercepted. And there's a tradition of credible witness accounts, police officers, military, whatever you want, going back decades that talk to something going on. Either there is a mass hallucination that ranges over decades and has some kind of, telepathic communication based on people who've never met describing similar incidents, or, I think the more realistic answer, which is what we are going to, I think, find out in the next few years, simply because of more journalistic and scientific scrutiny, that latter point particularly, is that really there is something going on here, and the government just doesn't know what to do with it. And how do you address that? And so the stigma point, make it all a little bit silly and hope these things don't, create issues. Although if you look at some of the nuclear weapons portfolio with this, there are points, I would say, of national security concern.
Sure.
You're right. The government doesn't know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, Tom, you said you felt pretty confident that this couldn't be Russian or Chinese technology. Why do you feel so certain? Because I think what most people have sort of gone to outside of a extraterrestrial explanation is, these are probably all likely Chinese. We had the one Chinese spy balloons, probably more Chinese spy balloons or other sort of surveillance aircraft, or maybe they're partnered up with Russia, or maybe Russia has their own capability or some other country. But, most likely, I think fingers point at those two. What makes you so confident that they don't have the technological sophistication to achieve things that, we've been unable to achieve with regards to our own military and surveillance technology?
Yeah, I think the first point to note is, that some of these things will turn out to, these most recent ones, why I say that is the NORAD commander's statement that it's an unconventional propulsion source. The Chinese and Russians still at their next generation, which we have good insight to, and at least people I've talked to, we have pretty good insight into how they're developing their next generation of capabilities. So hypersonic glide vehicles, for example, still based on flight surface characteristics, propulsion, and also the fact that these unconventional things have been essentially described for decades in a way that you would expect, an adversary or the United States would have deployed these into action to China for Taiwan, for example, Russia, Ukraine, the United States to maintain global, foreign policy supremacy, whatever you want, they would have delivered. We have no intelligence information to suggest that there's been some breakthrough by these countries over a long period of time. And secondly, I think that the point to note is that, when you look at things, these most recent incidents that, again, being described as unconventional, how are they operating? Well, you need a launch platform to get them there, right? You need to, submarines can launch these things, but it's very hard for submarines to get that close to the United States. Certainly very hard for them to operate something that would suddenly appear in the middle of the country. And so it just doesn't add up. Again, there are, like with the drone element off the West Coast, some of that, although I think more limited than sometimes people, or it's not everything, certainly. There is a Chinese. The PLA will fly them off tankers, drones, advanced drones. But the unique ones that show, again, those breakthrough technologies in terms of the data and the witness reports, the Tic Tac in 2004, with Dave Fravor, for example, that is not China, Russia, and the United States. And because it's not that, and no other nation, it leaves either the mass hallucination effect, which I just don't think is credible, or it leaves something truly unconventional going on. And again, I suppose the top line answer to your question is, everyone I've talked to, and I'm sure far better journalists that kind of doing the national security beat have talked to, there is no information to suggest the Chinese or Russians or another actor, Elon Musk, the United States, have these capabilities in a delivered platform. And again, we're talking decades here. This isn't just something that we've started.
That's a good point.
Let's actually, I want to spend time on this just last thing, because this is an important point, which is they're like, what, you think China or Russia doesn't have better technology than us? Here's the difference. Hypersonic missiles is an engineering problem. Conceptually has been known in science for decades. The atomic bomb was also an engineering problem. In the 30s or something, we knew about the possibility of an atomic weapon. It was just something very difficult to try and create. The SR-71 Blackbird, a technological marvel, but going Mach, whatever, was theoretically possible. Moving this way is not known in modern science, has not been known even in the physics laboratory for decades. And that's exactly like, you'd have to believe that they have an entire like stack of research and science and R&D developed outside of the United States, which has the most sophisticated and best, academic environment in the world. You can just go look at the Nobel Prize, that was developed somehow over the last 50 years and in secret. Am I right, Tom, in describing it that way?
Absolutely. And I think there's also more data here. I think CNN actually sort of reported on this, that some of the sensor systems supposedly with the jets may have been interfered with. One thing that's notable about this is you will get, and why it has been perhaps easier for the government to say this is, well, just ignore it. When radar, different sensor, imagery, infrared, whatever, but radar is the particular one I've heard, will get close to some of these things. You can get a distorted return that suggests there's some kind of effect on the radar going in and out, like a time dilation, whatever it is, something really unconventional. That again, we are talking about, I think, a new type of physics with these most extraordinary small percentage of objects. And as you say, we just had the announcement on nuclear fusion, which is nothing compared to what these things seem to exhibit and have seemed to exhibit since, the 1940s.
Right.
I think it's Chat GPT. It's broken loose.
ChatGPT's got nothing on these guys. Okay. Yeah. They Tom, laugh at ChatGPT.
It's great to see you and wonderful to have your expertise. Thank you so much for taking some time with us today. We may be calling on you again here soon.
I think you'll be a fixture on the show. We appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.